So how is the government planning to mitigate and manage the ongoing prevalence and escalation of catastrophes in our world now? Does that plan involve continuing the heavy reliance on volunteers to be the front line of defence?
Murray.
Thanks for the question, and unfortunately we are now going into another disaster season that looks like it will be very serious, this time bushfires rather than floods. And what we've seen, I guess, over the last few years is the whole country be put under enormous pressure from these increasing disasters we're seeing from climate change. So I guess our response to that, to begin with, is to try to reduce emissions in a serious way. That's the long-term cause of this. But the sort of things that you're talking about, we are already investing in some new ways to make sure that we've got the personnel to cope with increasing numbers of disasters. I've met a lot of volunteers in a lot of different disaster zones, including in Kevin's electorate over the last couple of years, and people are fatigued. The volunteers have been out there for 3 or 4 years straight, and obviously not only helping their own communities, but sometimes going interstate or even overseas. So one of the things that we've done in the short term is provide about $38 million to a volunteer organisation called Disaster Relief Australia, which is made up of veterans who are volunteers. They're an additional force that we can be bringing in to take a bit of pressure off volunteers in SESs and fire services, take a bit of pressure off the Defence Force as well, who are being really stretched by the number of disasters that we're seeing. But we're in the middle of doing a longer term piece of work about how can we provide the personnel that we're going to need into the future to cope with more frequent and more intense disasters.
And I think the elephant in the room is it's more frequent and more prevalent because of climate change, right? And, you know, I think about the impact as well that this will be having on young people. We're already seeing what that effect of more frequent natural disasters is having on this country. Can you imagine if we go above 1.5 degrees, which we're very much on track to do? And, you know, a couple of years ago, if you remember, young Australians took the government to court to demand that the government should have a federal duty of care to protect young people from climate change. And while that was initially, the court agreed, later it was overturned. But the point is that young people are inheriting a climate volatile future, especially in Australia, but also internationally too. So, you know, girls, for example, 12.5 million girls we pulled out of school every 2 years because of climate disasters. And by failing to take effective climate action in order to meet those targets, we're effectively signing a death sentence for millions of people around the world who come from countries that don't have the resources and are deeply affected by climate change. And I also just wanted to say, you know, we'll probably talk about the referendum today, but, you know, think about this timing, and I'm thinking about climate change. And First Nations people have had that knowledge of living with the land, and it was actually that knowledge that when the British came, they immediately dismissed it and put in a system that's now killing the planet and killing this country. So what an opportunity, and how lucky we are that First Nations people have reached out and offered an initiative like the Voice to Parliament, despite that violence, because we can use that traditional knowledge and build a climate action plan that with the people who have lived here for 60,000 something years.
Kim, I want to go back to you. Just tell us your own story. You are actually a volunteer.
Yeah, so I'm a firefighter. I drive a fire truck. This is my husband, he does too. I'm now in my mid-60s. He's in his early 70s. We are some of the younger people in our brigade. In the last year and a half, we've had 3 of our fire truck drivers, these are important people, who have reached the age where they are no longer able to drive fire trucks. In the Black Summer fires, we worked 13-hour days, day after day after day after day after day after day. And for us, we only stopped going out on the trucks when our place was directly threatened. It's beyond exhausting. Another part of my background is I'm a psychologist, retired now, who specialised in trauma. You can probably hear in my voice now, there is trauma attached to me from those fires. There is trauma attached to a lot of people. We lost really good, experienced firefighters, volunteers, because they had to make decisions about which house to save, which house they didn't. For me, and for a lot of people as well, there is also the ecological grief of what we are dealing with. When you see a koala charred at the top of a tree, when you see massive amounts of incredibly important habitat destroyed. And I just want to make one last point. Some of these DAs that are being blocked are getting blocked because they are inappropriate for the situations that they're in. So if you've got a single road in or out, which is our community, and you are putting in a lot of extra housing, there is not the escape routes for those people. And that is happening all up and down our country.
That's a really interesting point, Kevin. It brings me to you. And going back to your substantial question, you're saying that the volunteers are getting older.
We're getting old.
So what do you think should happen, and what do you think people like Kevin should embrace?
I don't have an easy answer.
Because there isn't one, is there?
No. The issue about getting Resilience Australia going, that sounds good. But here's the other factor in that. If what you're getting is retired personnel, then you're getting the same issues that you've got with us. And we're getting old.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Kevin, the ageing issue. How do you
Firstly, thank you for the volunteer work you do. And,
Thank you. I was expecting that.
and certainly from an area that has had severe bushfires and a flood in the last few years, and very conscious of the great contribution that volunteers make. But to go back to the question too, before I get to the staffing of it, because obviously there's a mixture of staffing and full-time people, but I think we need to do much more with mitigation as well. So Yasmi talks about our cultural learnings. I mean, our Indigenous brothers and sisters used to do a lot of cultural burning, and we need to do a lot more controlled burning so the fuel doesn't build, and when the fires come through, they do far more damage. And also with flooding, and I'll be talking tomorrow in about a year's time when the CSIRO do a hydrology report for our area. You know, sure, these are becoming more frequent, these events are happening, but, you know, we need to spend far more money on preparation and mitigation rather than recovery at the end of these events.
So, yes, the obvious thing with mitigation is hazard reduction burns. But the window of time to be able to do hazard reduction burns safely is the operative word, plus have the personnel there to safely supervise a hazard reduction burn is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. The other thing that and this is a personal opinion, is we have a lot of feral species of plants and animals coming into this country now that are aggravating the fire risk. So we have grasses that have been imported from South Africa because they make good stock food, and they are ladder fuels. They go up into the trees at a rapid rate of knot. We don't know how toxic that smoke is because no one's done the research. My lung capacity is limited, I think, because of exposure to it. Do you want me to be quiet now?
I think these should be on the panel.
Can I just...
Carly, I'll let you take it and then I'll go to our next.
Kim, I just want to add my thanks for but I recently had a briefing from Greg Mullins, who is one of the founders for Emergency Leaders for Climate Action. Amazing person. And so actually what I would say to both the current government and the opposition, we do know what we need to do here. There's been a review. There were 50 recommendations on what we need to do as a nation to be ready for the next season. Yet how many of those recommendations have we actually enacted?
Well, of the 14, I think it was, that applied to the federal government, I think it's about 12 that have been completed, and the other 2 aren't far off. There are others that are required by the states and territories. They're making good progress, and to be fair to them, some of them were always going to take a period of time, but there's more to be done. There's more to be done.
But why is it when I looked at the Nationals climate policy online today, and it was talking about technological innovation and better management practices. Like, why isn't the Nationals and LRP using words like climate crisis if they're supposedly representing farmers or people
I'll
in
ask
regional
Kevin
areas?
and then I'm going to go to our poll.
Well, look, I think, we have set targets historically about meeting our carbon emission reduction targets. And let's not lose sight of the fact that we set targets for Kyoto in 2020 and we met them. And we had targets set for 2030. Well, it's a fact. You might not like it, but it's a fact. We also set targets for 2030 and we were on target to meet those. So while many other countries have set targets and not met them. So, Australia, so far, every target we've set, we've met. We had the biggest...
We're gaming the system, that's why. Yeah.
Well, if you call it gaming... If you think gaming the system is having an incentive for having the highest rooftop solar take up, you call it gaming, I call it good results.
Quick response from you, Murray, and then we're going to move on.
If Kevin's going to raise climate change, I can't let it go without pointing out that just this weekend We've had Barnaby Joyce, aided by Matt Canavan, again try to get the Nationals to abandon their commitment for net zero.
Which we didn't.
But,
Which we didn't.
But it got defeated.
But does it concern you that it even came up?
Can I just add?
Okay.
The so-called leadership team of the National Party, David Littleproud, Bridget McKenzie and a couple of others, they decided to abstain from the vote. That's leadership in the National Party on climate change, is abstaining from a vote. I mean,
What do you
the
think of
Nats are
that?
as divided as ever, and it's going to be a problem for them for some time to come.
Yeah.
Look, Murray, we're a party. I encourage debate. No, not there. We had a debate on that. It was overwhelmingly in support of
How
it.
did you vote?
I voted to keep on with the net zero 2050
But not
target.
your leaders.
actively
Not the
or did you
leaders.
abstain?
But just on that,
The leaders
just
went missing.
No, they didn't go
So you
missing.
actively voted for...
I've actively voted for
Okay.
that. Now, the leadership sit at the top table, of which you don't vote, because it's for the members in
That's
the...
leadership?
Well, that's how we operate.
All right,
It
we're
wasn't-
gonna-
they
we're
wasn't-
gonna-